아니야.
뭔 양반이 아래 것들 마냥 뜀박질을 그러고 해부요.
내 이제부터 물고기를 공부해 보려고 한다. 네 도움 없이는 안 되지 않느냐?
배운 대로 못 살면 생긴 대로 살아야지라.
내가 바라는 것은 양반도 상놈도 없고 임금도 필요 없는 그런 세상이다.
This is Getting Past Subtitles. My name is Sean Peel.
And I'm DK Lee.
And welcome to our third episode on this black and white series. And we are past the classical black and white movies, you know, the old-timey stuff that you would associate with movies without color. You know what I mean? We watched The Handmaid, right?
Yeah.
No, The Housemaid. God.
We watched The Housemaid last week, and then we watched Spring in a Small Town.
Yep.
The first week.
Yeah. So both pretty old. 1960 was The Housemaid. And we are jumping like way to last year.
Yeah, last year actually, yeah.
So it should be an interesting dynamic of, you know, we talked I think a lot about just the use of color. And we'll definitely get into that specifically for, you know, like doing it today, you know, when you could do whatever you want in movies, it feels like, and why they kind of chose to do that.
Yeah, funny thing is this is the most recently made, but it's probably the most oldest in terms of the actual plot and
Oh yeah, where it's set.
yeah, the setting of it is actually probably the oldest, but it is actually the newest production.
Yeah, because all the other ones are set like when they were made. In that,
yeah, it was contemporary to its time.
Yep.
But this one's not.
This is quite dated. But this movie is called The Book of Fish. Came out last year in 2021, I believe in March is what I read. This one's directed by Lee Joon-Ik, who is, I guess, known to create historical dramas.
Yeah.
That's kind of his thing. Did you see, the only one I saw was Hope. Have you seen that movie?
Might know like the Korean name of it, but not the American name.
No?
Yeah.
It was like the daughter who, like an incident happened and then it's like a family kind of drama of like recovering that. And it's like the most gut-wrenching movie.
Yeah. There's a lot of those.
Yeah. But I can like definitely see like from that to this like character, like he does great like character movies. Like the way that he does characters is really, really nice. But all the other movies are like historical dramas as well.
There's one about this this guy who is a poet, and it's set in a time when like the Japanese like invade Korea,
right.
But then this guy, he's a fairly young dude, but he's studying in Japan, and he's Korean guy studying in Japan, but it's like when the occupation of Korea happens, and he's like a poet, and he basically gets like, you know, captured or like imprisoned, and it's a story about him, and that's another historical drama thing that was pretty good. Yeah.
Okay. That sounds interesting.
But he does a lot of stuff like that.
Very.
But what I love about his movies is the way that he uses the characters and the situation to poke at bigger themes. And kind of ask questions about things that are happening. Yeah. Through the characters and you know.
Yeah.
Poses questions to the audience about, you know, what's happening, but it never feels like, oh, like this is what I want you to think. Right. It's more about like an open-ended question about what it means or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, if it's anything from this movie, like he chooses characters or particular people that go against the grain of their time period, right? So like, and here's, you know, the main character questions like, you know, it's not that he's against like Neo-Confucianism of the time, but he's also accepting of like Western ideology and like Catholicism and things like of that nature. And these characters just like question and go against the grain of, you know, the politics at the time, or like, you know, the social structure or social order or anything like that, you know?
Yeah.
And that like brings about kind of perspective essentially, right? So
Yeah.
So that's a really good conversation starter in that way.
Yeah.
I wonder what it'd be like if he did a modern movie like today, like what he would.
I'm not sure if he does have one, but
No, probably not.
yeah.
That's Bong Joon-Ho's job. Classism. Yeah. So, why did you want to pick this movie?
It was actually one of my favorite movies last year. Watching it, I really enjoyed the movie. I thought that like it's unique in that it was black and white too, but aside from that, I really thought that the story was very simple, yet it had depth to it, like it had layers to it, and
Yeah.
and I loved the almost like simple nature of it in terms of like the people that are living on the island and how they survive there, and kind of it's funny because in the beginning of the movie we see the three brothers who are part of the king's court, right? And once the king dies and the new king is instated, there's a lot of political things that happen, and this is all the backstory of it, but political things happen, and they're basically pushed out of power. And the three brothers one of the brothers is killed, and the other two are exiled. And that's how they are taken to the island of Huksando. That's where the main character goes.
Yeah.
But it's a very like stark contrast between that political world and this really simple life of the island. And I really like that comparison and just that idea and what the movie is like showing us, and kind of what the main character also kind of finds through that journey, through that experience, and through him meeting the people on the island, and how he already had a certain kind of defiance to, like you said, the normal going against the grain of the political ideals of the time. But being on that island, I think he was able to express that in a certain kind of way.
Yeah.
And I think that the letters that he exchanges with his brother too kind of show the different ways that he thinks about life, and he thinks about how the world should be.
Yeah.
Compared to even his own brother, who was also exiled, but he still holds more onto the Confucianist ways and the hope of trying to change the system from the inside in one sense. Whereas this guy, the main character, kind of thinks of it in a totally more revolutionary kind of way, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a cool kind of thing that it's very layered, right? It's not like they don't like say it directly to your face, but through watching it you can kind of see, and it's even more exemplified through Changde, the fisherman, the guy who who wants to become a scholar when he's a fisherman, and that kind of conflicts with the way that the main character,
how he lives and like
and what he hopes for even his own pupil, right?
I think the most interesting part was like when I realized that like there is a dichotomy with both characters in the movie. Like they're pretty much equally as important by the end of the movie.
Yeah.
But it's like it's great that like the teacher Yak Jung, I think his name is.
Yeah.
Like, he's like comes from a political background who goes to have like a simpler life, and like I said, he's able to kind of like express what he's really kind of believed all along, you know, and like just like kind of escape from that world and how everything does, and then like he kind of adopts Changdae as his student, kind of like wants to educate him, but also like, you know, is like, this is what's really important. But for Changdae, like personally, he wants to, you know, acquire like money or just like a stable living and just like get away from like the simple lifestyle living as a fisherman.
He also wants to like change the world, right? He wants to be the difference in the world, and he has that naive, very pure intention of like, I want to, you know, like
really cause a difference.
Yeah, make a difference in the things that are happening.
And like the stark difference is similar to even Yakjung's brother, is like he wants to do it without kind of changing or introducing something new per se. Like he still wants to do it within like the way that like
the traditional
sense. Just like changing the corruptness of it essentially. Whereas Yakjung, like you said, wants to kind of brings on like something totally revolutionary, and believes that like, you know, like Neo-Confucianism and like Catholicism, like these things can go like in harmony with one another, right? Those are like the biggest ideology differences. But it's just like Yakjung goes in one direction and Changdae goes in the opposite direction, you know? And so they end up going in. So it's just kind of interesting to see that like they're close characters and they cross paths, but what one wants, the other had. And like he ends up kind of like coming full circle by the end, you know? So it's...
And then that's like beautifully portrayed through the way that they exchange knowledge, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Where Yakjun wants to like learn more about the fish and see like, you know, like wants to write a book about all these different fish and you know what they are and how to, you know, the different ways that you can use them, or like, you know, what they are, so that the people eat them mainly, but like so that the people know, right? Like so that the people understand that, you know, these are the different types of fishes. Because for him, like, and then this is kind of mentioned, but it's more inferred. It's like for him, like that's what's important. Like having knowledge about fish, having knowledge about the livelihood of these people and how to better their lives, because having that knowledge of fish means that they're able to fish better, right? And that means that they're able to provide better for their families and stuff like that. And that's like the deep like reason for the book, right? That's why he wants to create the book. But Changdae kind of doesn't understand that, right? He, like you said, he feels like he can make a difference by, you know, going into the court and, you know, coming into favor of the king and, you know, like, you know, I guess persuading the king and you know, persuading the political power in swaying and trying to make a difference that way. And it's like that difference, right? That contrast there. It's
like the classic like Yakjung kind of understands that, you know, to make a difference or just like give the power to the people, where Changdae is like power over the people, you know what I mean? Like and rule from top down. Exactly, and like the way that they both kind of see how they can make the greatest difference is difference in that how, right? So that's kind of where the dichotomy is. But man, we're getting way ahead of ourselves.
Well, I mean, that's like all part of the movie.
I would say for me, I mean, I'd never like, this movie was completely, you know, out of my mind when you pitched it. And I mean, I really enjoyed it by the end of it. I thought it gets better as I watched it through the end. It's a little long. I mean, it's like 2 hours, about even, right? But it does get better as the movie goes on, mainly because, I mean, he kind of like, quote unquote, warned me, like, I wonder how you're going to watch this because there are some things that feel like a little complicated, or like, I don't know how well it's going to translate, you know? And I definitely experienced that watching it, particularly in the beginning, like, mainly because of, we talked about this off air too, where it's like, exposition wise, like not having the pretext of the time period that it is set, or like, you know, what, like, why are they persecuting Catholics, you know, or like, oh, the king dies and then his son becomes the king, but he's like a kid, and like the wife is really the one that's like pulling the string. You know, all that isn't really said, but it's like, it's in the scene, so you can kind of get an idea of that, you know, but you're not explicitly given like the historical background,
Right.
but and it does it pretty. The thing is, like, it speeds it along.
It's very concise, right?
It is.
It's
it
just
is.
like this is this and this is that,
Yeah.
and then they move on.
Which is like, that's why by the end of this movie, I was like, really now I'm like, I should definitely should go see it again, because just knowing everything will help now watching the movie and kind of
Yeah.
like getting a grasp on it all. But like seeing that it is concise is actually pretty good for the movie, to be honest.
Right.
Like it really tries to waste no time giving you the exposition and setting it up and then getting to the island where like the bulk of the story
movie.
really is, you know?
Yeah.
So kind of seeing it after that, I was like, oh, it's concise, but that's really good in like pacing wise anyway,
Right.
you know? But like for somebody like me who's new and like doesn't really know much, it's like I'm struggling to like keep up with like there's three brothers and like I don't even know who the main character is at this
Right.
point. Like
Yeah.
is it this one? Is it the old one? And I'm like, I don't even know what the movie's about. Like Catholics are being executed. I'm like, is this like a religious persecution
Yeah.
like movie, you know?
Yeah, to be fair, even when I first watched it, I had the same kind of reaction. Right? It's not. I'm not like a scholar of history,
Right.
You know, even Korean history. So like, I didn't go into the movie knowing everything. At least I understand Korean, so
Right.
I have a little bit of an advantage. But even then, like, it's not like I understood everything. But I think that just given the flow of the movie, and the fact that it goes into a simpler thing.
Yeah.
I think it helps a lot
for sure.
for you know, getting a better grasp and being more engaged in the movie by the second half of it, right?
Yeah, because like even from the get go, once he gets to the island, the movie definitely slows down, and you feel like, okay, like this is where the story is really supposed to be.
Yeah.
And eventually, like a lot of the exposition and just like setting up the history and stuff kind of goes out the window a little bit, because it's really not that important to the central ideas of the movie.
Yeah.
But like once Yak Jung is on the island and he's like getting to know the people, and then he meets Jung Dae, like that's what's really important, you know?
Yeah.
And like everything else that comes with that, with like some of the things is still really, it comes down to like once he like the island life stuff and like Yak Jung writing the book and like him kind of finding his own like new path with the book about fish and stuff, like all that becomes simple and like easy to understand. It's really enjoyable. Like once we go back into like how the politics of everything is incorporated into the story, that's where like kind of have to pay attention a little more, or like you can kind of easily get lost in. And like the problem is maybe not so much of a problem who you ask, but like that's could be like a bit more of the issue with it,
Right.
because it is central to the movie. Like all that, the political stuff still is really central to like the main themes and stuff.
Yeah, it's central to the themes of it, but not so much to the character. Just like understanding the characters.
Like really, because by the end of it, as long as you can understand that like the story of Yakjon and Changdae, where Yakjon is like, you know, he's older, he's exiled, he's like passing down his knowledge to this new student that he's adopted, Changdae, and Changdae is like, you know, kind of the rebel of the child, right? And like he's learning, and then he goes against like his father's wisdom, ends up being a politician, and sort of has like the fall from grace kind of storyline, right?
Yeah.
And then he has an appreciation and understanding of like going back to the island and like the simple like living, you know what I mean? Like all that, like it's pretty easy to understand, and that is really like the central character story.
Yeah.
So like as long as you get that, like you kind of have enough. Like it does really well.
Yeah.
But it's like everything else around that. It's like, you know, once Changdae becomes a politician, and like why he like has that fall from grace. Like, you know, he's like trying to create a difference, and like then he like realizes firsthand like the corruption between like the higher politicians and like, you know, herding the sheep, so to speak, you know, in that sense, and like the problem that taxation is causing on the common people, essentially, you know. And there's like the big climactic scene where like that the kid is, or that family, the husband is being taxed.
Cuts off his balls.
Yeah, cuts off his penis.
Yeah.
Because like his newborn baby is being taxed for like no
so like
reason.
in back then they would have it so that each person would have to like pay taxes, right?
Right.
But you had to be 16 or older. You would get taxed if you were 16 or older.
Right.
But then because they were so corrupt, they would tax even dead people.
Yeah.
Or like they would tax even like, under 16.
Mm-hmm.
And that would, have a toll on the people because they don't have
Yeah, they have nothing
the
to
means to give. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they would, they would just die or starve or, have problems.
Like on that point, the biggest thing that lost me, that when I went back to kind of review the movie, was like the pine tree appeal that he was getting at, which that like slipped my mind at the beginning. Like I knew he was like trying to write an appeal, but I didn't know. I thought
so for that too, even there, like so all the trees are like the property of the government basically. And so if you have the tree there, then you have to like pay taxes to the government for that as well.
Right.
And so like the reason why Yak Jung's basically his wife, I guess, it turns into his wife. The reason why she was getting rid of all the trees is because if you have it there, then you're gonna have to pay pay taxes for that. And so that's why she was getting rid of it. And but it's a little bit like hard to grasp if you don't understand that, if you don't have that background context.
Right, yeah. And it's just easy to miss too, because like my first watch through, I kind of missed that whole.
Because it's not like a long scene; it's like a pretty short scene.
Yeah, it's just like a couple.
What
dialogues.
are you doing there? What are you doing to that tree?
Yeah,
it's like
I gotta get rid of it. It's causing me money.
Yeah,
yeah, it's a money tree in the opposite sense. But like but the fact that he's like actually writing it in later scenes, I was like, is this just something that he's doing? It's like free time or like part of his job. Like I just
he's exiled, so he doesn't really have a job. He's just basically a prisoner on the island, but he has a little more leeway because
he was.
What are you gonna do? Like you don't. There's no CCTV there. You can't monitor him doing.
I sent this letter anonymously.
Like overall, I think, given all of those things, I think what also helps a lot for the movie is the levity of it. Like how, especially in the mid section of it, it's very lighthearted, right? It's not like really heavy. Like the beginning part's a little bit more like that. Yeah. And then near the end, it's a little bit more like that.
Right.
But the middle part is really just like them.
Like a family drama.
Yeah, like a family drama and like apprentice and like, mentor kind of thing going on. And just like how they exchange knowledge and like him, like trying to figure out what all these like fish are and like them helping out and the little subplot with Changdae and his wife, and all that, the girl and the love interest things that are happening and all of that really adds to the, I think, like he's kind of like a family kind of feel to it, right?
Yeah.
And just like really feels like they're living their lives there.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that really kind of sells the
like the attraction.
The attraction and the beauty of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean I could speak to that too. Like I think those were the most interesting parts of the movie is when it dipped into just like Yakjong and Changdae and like them becoming closer and then becoming like student teacher and just them exchanging knowledge.
Like the banter too.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like their whole transaction.
Yeah.
Like how just that whole story kind of was the most interesting part of it. And like bails him out of jail.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Got spanked. The governor is like a funny character.
Yeah, he's kind of like he's kind of a little like ditzy, right?
Yeah. And there's like a lot of things that goes over your head, like where like Changdae made fun of him, the governor, because like he wasn't that like knowledgeable.
Yeah,
like, he couldn't like speak that well yet, right? And they kind of like showed him up, and that's why he got punished. And like later on, it kind of comes back when he like couldn't think of a word, and Changdae was like, "This guy's a freaking idiot."
Yeah, like when the woman is like talking to that other guy.
Yeah. He's like quoting like the book.
Yeah, he's like, you don't even know what this is, and like back then it's like the women had to like be respectful of the man, right?
Right, yeah.
And stuff like that, and they're like talking about that, and then
Yeah.
governor comes in and he's like trying to show him up,
Yeah.
and it's like he forgets the word, and he's like, "Oh, this is the word."
Yeah. This is the line, and
Yeah.
then he's like, "But I'm not really sure if that applies in this situation." He's like, "You fool!
yeah,
Get out of here!"
yeah,
But it all really works together. It's the whole lighthearted part of it is like really nice. It's like, you know, it's a lot of comedy too as well. It's a really good dynamic between Yeokjun and Jung Dae overall. I think there's a really good characters.
yeah. Like even I feel like even like the poetry part when Changdae goes to the brothers where the other brother is exiled and he
Right.
goes there, and the other disciple of his younger brothers is there, and they start like doing the poetry battle,
The rap battle.
the rap battle, and you know,
Everybody comes in to watch from the door.
yeah, and they start doing the poetry thing, and
Yeah.
and the younger brother's disciple basically runs out of
like,
things to kind of
yeah.
say, and he gets shown up by Changdae and stuff like that. It like the actual poetry part might be hard to understand, and even me too. It's like I can't really fully understand that, but you understand the flow of what's happening within that sequence, right?
Exactly.
And I think that's the important part, right?
Yeah.
It's like because there's that it pays off because before that, when they're on the Huksando Island and the disciple, the younger brother's disciple comes to visit Myeokjeon, and they like, you know, they're like, oh, you want to like recite a poem, you know, while you're here. And Yakjun's like, oh, like, do you want to, you know, well, the younger disciple was like, oh, you want to join, does Changdae want to join? Because he's officially a disciple now.
You're part of the inner circle now. You know?
And then Yakjun's like, no, like, he doesn't even know, like
sidelined him so hard.
He's like, yo, he doesn't even know the basic letter, like the words yet.
He's still on like book 2.
Yeah.
Yikes.
He's got much to learn.
Young grasshopper.
Yeah. So it pays off at that moment when he finally is able to, you know.
Yeah. Poor Changdae in those scenes though, like, man,
Yeah.
definitely got sidelined a couple times.
Yeah.
but like you said, I mean, like you don't have to understand like the intricacies or like, you know, the specifics of like the translation parts or like the poetry parts and, you know, all those minute things. But like the movie does do a good job of like making the intention really clear, like you said, of like what's going on in that scene when they're doing poetry together, and that Changdae bests the other disciple. Or like, you know, back when you first meet the other disciple when he's visiting Yeokjung, they're like eating dinner together. You understand that like Jungdae has like feels jealous of this other disciple, and like he's obviously getting along more with Yeokjung than him, right? Like he's feeling like outside of the table. You know,
right. And I love that scene because the way that they framed it, it's like the Yakjun and the disciple, and then you have Changdae, like, and there's just that wall basically, and he's like outside where the kind of like the, what do you call it, the
like the porch, like
the
the veranda?
the porch, like that area,
Yeah.
And he's just sitting outside while the two are like inside, and I love that shot because it just shows like the barrier between him and the disciple in Yakjun.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, even like when they're eating dinner, he has to like constantly like look back, and he's just like this person that's just like back there, you know?
Yeah.
Just kind of like not really part of the conversation at all.
Yeah.
So it's really cool. I think Jungdae has a really good arc in general. It was really cool to see, like, you know, going from like little fisherman, you know, up into like this sort of very educated political person. You get like really lost in time in this movie as well. Like time just kind of flows, you know.
Yeah.
And then before you know it, you're
14
like
years in.
yeah. You're like I'm like you skipped, and like Changdae goes from like, I don't know, 20 to like 28 in an instant or something.
Yeah.
And then, you know, like especially in the family drama parts where it's like once sort of Yeokjun and Changdae like become especially close and they're like learning a lot from each other, then it's like, you know, that the love interest with Changdae and the girl, and then like all of a sudden they're married and have kids, and then out of nowhere like Yeokjung's married to the lady that was housing him, and then they have kids, and it's like, what happened exactly?
Things happened. They got busy.
And so it just kind of like speeds along sort of the time and in that sense, and the movie goes. But yeah, and how did you feel about like the second part of Changdae, right? So when he's decides, because for him, his whole thing is like we said, you know, he kind of wants to be sort of a revolutionist and change things from the inside. And we know that like even though he's a fisherman and like, you know, his mom, they were basically like their father had left them, and their father is a politician, right? And then he ends up going like back to him as like basically like his father is a gatekeeper between him and like sort of the other life. And eventually, you know, he's able to close that gap. And then there's like a decisive moment where it's like, oh, I'm going to take you guys back to the mainland, and, you know, I'll basically have you as like a politician. And he just kind of has this new life that he's always wanted, but then we really see like the challenges and like the reality of all that.
Yeah.
How do you think like the introduction of like the father and like how all that kind of came about?
Like the father part, I think really kind of it shows the heart of Changdae, I think, and how, because there's that moment when Changdae goes to see his father alone, right?
Yeah.
And he goes and he's like father, like I learned all these things, so like can you like adopt me? You don't have to like, because you don't have me on the official family registry, so you can just put me as an adopted son. And then he's like, yeah. And then he's like, so how much did you learn? I was like, oh, I got up to like this point. He's like, dude, that's all you know? Like,
I thought you would have done this and some.
Right.
Yeah.
And it just kind of goes to show his Changdae's like eagerness to want to get out of his fisherman life and finally be what's the word, like be recognized as something more than just a fisherman. And I think that's the biggest motivating factor, to be honest, for him, right? It's not even that he, like, there's a part of him that kind of has a sense of justice, right? And has a sense of wanting to make things right. But more than that, he really just wanted to have the authority and the ability for other people to see him as something more, right? Something, not
lesser than.
Yeah, more noble, right? Because his father wasn't noble, right? But his mother wasn't. And back then, whenever a child is born, your mother's line is like what like deems your like nobility or not or whatever.
Gotcha.
I think, yeah. And so that's why the father basically just like left them, and I think even probably like she wasn't even like his wife, right? It was just like
a mistress.
Yeah, mistress or whatever. That's probably why that happened. And so like that's what, like, so he really wanted to be recognized, and I think he wanted to be recognized as a noble, wanted to have that. That's why that was so important to him. Yeah. And I think that like even when Yakjun later on, he confronts him about it, right? Because he's like, oh, I want to go and make a difference, right? And that's his reasoning why he says that he wants to go to his father, because that at that point his father comes back and he's like, oh, like he finally, because there's like a rumor that Changdae is like very knowledgeable and he's actually very well learned now.
Right.
And then the father comes back, he's like, oh, my son, come on.
You got potential.
You got a lot of things to do. You got to take the test, the government issue test, the qualification test, and you got to become a you gotta follow in my footsteps, and that at that moment is like the pivotal point for Changdae, right, where he can decide to continue to learn with Yakjung or go with his father, and he decides to go with his father because deep inside, like that pride, like that desire to want to be recognized was what drove him.
Right.
And Yakjung basically tells it to his face. He's like don't say that you want to help people and all of that, because
you want money,
right? What you want is money and power, and just say that. Why don't you just say that up front instead of like hiding behind these words?
Right.
And I think that really shows that like where Changdae is at.
Yeah.
And I love that arc because through his journey of like going through and being with his father and seeing all the dirty, like corrupt things that are happening within the within the province, basically he's basically like the tax collector, and he's the one who's overseeing all of that and making sure that it's properly being taxed and everything by the people.
He's like the head tax collector, and then he's given like employees, quote unquote, who are like the loan sharks. They're the ones that are actually getting it from the people, and then they bring it to Changdae, and then Changdae whatever.
And so like him seeing all of that happen before his eyes, and him understanding that like he really doesn't have much power, even if he is in this position, right? Like it's that irony that hits him, and his inability to even face Yakjung again, right? Like until he passes away and he comes back, and that kind of bittersweet moment of him finally coming back to his mentor, but him not being there anymore. I think that I really love that arc, and just seeing him almost like regret his decision
exactly
at that point.
Well, it was just really interesting to see like one, like even him to kind of like, oh, you were right the whole time sort of moment, right? Like to be finally like be where he wanted to be, and then like you said, when he's there, you clearly see like even though you're in a position of power, you still have no power, right? Like there is still a very stiff structure in place, and I love that scene where like he's slowly kind of falling into madness, so to speak, and he's like talking with the two of his seniors, I guess, at like the drinking or whatever, and he basically like starts to like pitch or like question like the way that they're doing things and like how he would want to do it, and they basically just kind of scoff at him and like basically just
you still got much to learn,
know your place, peon, sort of deal, and like that's sort of the epitome moment of like, oh, like I actually really can't do anything.
And then when the peasant guy with his penis getting cut off, that kind of sets him off, right?
right. And like even that, it's like not his fault per se, right? Like that's like what that village or that family is like going through is like between they're paying taxes that they can't afford, like they're losing their livelihood, but Changdae is like his role is merely like sort of like the middleman. He's not the people that are under him who are like actually taking the money from the family and things like that. But Changdae, like he's like kind of responsible, but like not directly responsible,
he's almost like a bystander who's watching these things happen, and he has no power to do anything.
Exactly. So it's that weird gray zone that like that just kind of makes it all reality for him in that sense, and it's like really heartbreaking, but it's such a good tool, a good scene that it comes together. So but and then like he's like, oh, then goes back to the island, and then Yakjung's dead, and it's like, oh,
rip. What did you think about it being black and white? Because there are moments in the movie where they have a little bit of color, right?
Which scenes? I've only known like the last one where like the last shot fades into color.
that last shot fades into color, and there's a shot of the bird, the bluebird. That
Oh, how did I could I forget about the bluebird? Oh,
so there's that moment when he's talking about the bird, and the bird is blue. And flies. Yeah. But yeah, what did you think about like just like the movie being in black and white?
I think it really helped just kind of simplifying the movie. I think like it supports what we talked about in the beginning a lot, where really the core of the movie is like between Yakjeon and Jung-dae, and like their relationship and all those things. And I think, I mean, the movie is very like script driven, right? Like it's really like the characters really are driving the movie, and it is about these relationships, and it's about like the times, and it's like, commentary on the times, and like it's all these things that are very sort of like novelistic, right? And I think being black and white, like we said, it removes distractions when you're watching a movie, and I think it hones in on the fact that for you to pay attention to the story that's being told rather than visuals or anything else that could be a potential distraction. And like color could be a big one, right? And so I think like the main thing that I got away from watching this movie black and white was just that I could really appreciate, the story that is being carried through in like the script itself. Because like, it is a historical drama. And with that, like, I could think like there's so much you could do like just filmmaking and visually with a historical drama, like with artistry and like the costumes, like, it's very like, it's a period piece. Like they have like, sort of clothes and things that are, not like today, but there's a lot of like, even
and that
like
could pique the interest of the audience, right?
Right, exactly. And like also like a lot of it takes place in nature, it's not like modern civilization.
Right.
So there could be a lot of like greenery that's around.
Yeah.
Especially the movie is about fish, so like there's like the blue of the water, but there's like all types of different fish that are like could be of different like colors and details. Like all that is really sort of attracting if you kind of add color, like color could be a huge emphasis
on those things.
Yeah, just like on the island life. Like, you know what I mean? So it was really interesting to be like, well, why didn't they kind of focus on that? Like, it seems like in one sense, you could think about it as like a missed opportunity, because it's like, oh, it takes place in an island. Like, there's so much greenery, there's so much things we could contribute. But at the same time, like, that's not really what the movie's even about, Like, him making the book about fish is just like the plot, essentially, right? It's not really like the core essence of what the movie is. It just kind of serves as like a little bit of like a metaphor or just like a conduit of like everything else in that sense. Like you talked about like him writing the book of like what Yakjeon really wants is to like giving the power to the people, and like really the heart of the book is like being able to provide the people, or the people being able to provide for themselves if they had what Jung-dae had essentially, right? So like
it's like Chang-dae is not understanding of the fact that the knowledge that he has about fish is the knowledge of the people, and what can provide essentially. It is an example. It is an example of what could be that provides for the people, right? Whereas the knowledge that Yakjeon has is knowledge of very like, it's like almost political knowledge. It's like the things that you can do to like move like the pieces of like, like within a political sense and like drive power and his younger brother writing all those books about those different things is kind of showing that, right? Like he's trying to write all these books to kind of change the political landscape, or hopefully, change through his disciples, like change that kind of political landscape. Whereas Yakjeon is thinking more about how to create change through the people and create, like, if the people are able to eat and if people are able to provide themselves, then there will be change through that, right? Kind of sense, in that sense. But yeah, I really agree with that sense of like stripping down all of the potential, like you said, it is potentially missed opportunity of like showing the beauty of the island and showing all the different things that you could through color.
Right.
But I think that there is a very specific intention by using black and white in this movie. And even the way that they use the fade to color and stuff like that.
Yeah.
By the end of the movie. Because there is a line that Yakjun says near the end of the movie when he is, I think it's in the letter after he died, and Changde is reading the letter, and he's talking about how like a lot of the life of a fisherman is very muddled with like dirt and grime and like very dirty. Whereas the life that Yakjung kind of lives is almost like white and pure and clean, right? Because they're not with the fishes, they're not on the ground, like hunting or whatever.
Yeah.
And so they're living a very isolated from that isolated from the nature, and they're living that kind of life. And Yakjung kind of makes the point that maybe living a life that's dirty and kind of muddled is not a bad life. Like maybe there is a purpose and there is meaning in living a life like that.
Right.
And I think that that's kind of cool how the black and the white of the film also kind of speaks to that, right? Like because it's only two colors. I guess there's gray too. There's like a shade, right?
Right.
But it's very like in that sense black and white. But as we at the end see the landscape of the island and it turns to color, it kind of like is that change, right? Is that moment when it's no longer just this black and white, and you're finally able to come into a new world, new like idea of finding existence and meaning in not just like the high noble life, but also finding meaning in the small things and in the things that we might consider like lowly. Yeah. And I think that the black and white really speaks to that.
Yeah. Kind of feels like once it introduces things to color, it's like it feels fulfilled now.
Right. It kind of feels like, it's no longer just like black is the dirty stuff and the,
Black Mountain Island, they called it. Yeah. Or I think that was the translation. Yeah. And he's like, no, it's just called the island, the mountain. I think it was, it really worked. Like, and we kind of talked about this before too, where, after a while you forget like that it's in black and white a little bit, right? Like the idea of color just becomes absent as you're absorbed in the movie. And I think that's definitely true for this movie as well. You just kind of get absorbed by it and just it becomes part of the world that it's in until there's a blue bird that flies out of the
nest. But it's really beautifully shot too. I really love how that house is like up on the hill, and like there's like a lot of those night scenes with the moon and the sea behind it. Yeah, and it's just like, because it's black and white, it's just like glimmering, and it's just like a very beautiful like shot. I feel
there's a lot of detail in this movie. Despite lacking color, there is a lot of detail that was shot in this movie. Yeah, like even like in the ocean and like some of the water shots that they use are really nice. There's like one cool shot when they like the quick like Changde and like his love interest and they get married and stuff, and he asks her out, and then they're like swimming in
under
the ocean,
the
water. It's like
he slaps it.
Yeah, it's like a little mermaid scene. Yeah, all that's really cool. But like it's in black and white. It was really interesting that they did it like that. And so it all really works out. It is beautifully shot. I kind of get surprised sometimes of like the way that it was shot. That it's like it feels like a modern movie, but also like it's in black and white. So I think particularly because the past movies that we watched, like the way that they place the camera and the techniques are very sort of simple, or like very sort of like theater-esque, like I talked about. Whereas this is like where we kind of finished off, where now we're, we understand how to use a camera in film. We understand how to like use a camera to create a story in a movie rather than like just capturing a performance per se, So like it was just nice to see like, oh, it's still in black and white, but like visually it's totally different compared to everything else.
There's a lot more freedom in the way that the camera moves in this movie.
Yeah.
Or where it's placed.
Mm-hmm. So it was it's pretty neat.
Yeah.
Anything else? Anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I really like this movie. And fun fact, a colleague of mine, a person that I work with, his brother was actually the composer for this movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Unfortunately, he passed away recently.
Oh,
wow. But yeah, it's just kind of cool to see his works and how it lives on through these kinds of movies.
Yeah. Beautiful soundtrack.
Yeah,
for sure. It's unfortunate. I mean, I would definitely recommend this movie to a lot of people. It is a beautiful movie. Is a word that I would associate with it, for sure. I was doing when I was doing notes and stuff. It was interesting to see why Lee Joon-Ik kind of did this movie.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess so Yak Jung obviously has 3 brothers, right? His younger brother, who's the one that also exiled, and he written 500 books or something.
Yeah.
Yak Jung only written 2. That's a whole big thing. But his brother is really well known.
Yeah,
as historic figure, and so it's interesting why.
And they were considered like almost geniuses, in their political stature and the way that they
really
during that time, right? They were considered. That's why he had so many disciples. That's why all the disciples followed him and they wanted to learn from him and stuff like that because, and his older brother of a lesser stature, obviously in that sense, in that
sure
in that
he didn't accomplish as much as I did.
In that political sense, I guess he's not as well known, but go on.
But I mean, it was just interesting why he chose to focus on the older brother versus obviously the more prominent figure. And I think he kind of said just that it's because he wrote this book about fish, and also his stance on Catholic Western ideology being mixed with Confucianism, and just like we talked about earlier, he found it more interesting to be choosing a character that is against the grain of the current meta of society and the current politics and nature of the time. Essentially, it's basically even though he's not as famous, he was more of somebody that was
a visionary in one sense, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Who sees further out and is able to be more open-minded about the things in the world in one sense.
So, but it was also interesting that so in the book, Jansanbo it's called?
Yeah, Chasanobo, yeah.
Chasanobo?
Yeah.
So John Dae is mentioned in the book.
Yeah.
But that is the only historical record of him. And so from a story perspective and what he did, there's a lot of freedom you could even done with Chung Dae. So it was really smart and really interesting to use that to the full potential he did in this movie.
Yeah.
Where it's John Dae really is the anchor of the movie. And even as a character for Yak Jung, so even it's it was just a playing field, it's here's a character that exists and obviously he's important in some way, obviously, to this book that was his life, and then just being able to max out the potential of that,
Yeah.
So
and having the creative liberty to create a character and
from
flesh out a story.
It's just from using a writer's mind. It's a golden nugget thing. You know what I mean? Because when you write something, when you're using real life figures, or you're doing a biopic or anything that's biographical on somebody, it's a balancing act. You're on a beam as to how much portraying that person is, and between fact and fiction. And
usually because an image of that character is usually ingrained in people's minds. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, and that person exists. Like you can't change the fundamentality of that figure or that person, you know. And like they're a real being. It's like you can only do so much to dramatize a story out of that. But then being able to have somebody like Changdae who's there but like not known at all, like you have a freedom to kind of use him in that sense. So
yeah,
it's like a hall pass in a weird way. Yeah, I think it's pretty much it. Highly recommend. We will be stepping back into time for the last movie of the series. But it will be with somebody very prominent. I don't know if you heard of some dude. It's Japanese. It's called Yoshijiro Ozu. You know? You ever heard that name, Ozu?
Nah.
Ozu? No? A lot of people talk about that guy. Ozu?
Yes.
Very prominent classic contemporary filmmaker who is known for family dramas, I think particularly, right?
Yeah.
I talk about him like I know him, but I've never seen one of his movies. So I'm quite lacking. But yeah, so I'm particularly excited actually to watch it because of that. You know, it's about time I do my studying, my knowledge. And I like family dramas. Family dramas are usually really good. So
yeah.
We'll be watching Late Spring, which came out in 1949. So I'm particularly excited. I have no idea what this movie's about. Maybe like
it's a family drama.
Hopefully not like spring in a small town.
Why not?
More spring. Why can't it be winter in a large town?
I'm sure he has like a winter one.
Probably. He's got like a bunch of movies in it.
Yeah.
Definitely put in his work for the years. But other than that, we will see you guys next week for Late Spring. Peace.
Bye.